Welcome to another installment of the Urban Design Commission. Kevin, if you wouldn't mind noting the roll. My name's Cliff. I'm your commission chairman, and with us is Kevin and Julie from the planning department, and also Stefan, who goes by the alias of Tech Facilitator. Stefan, while you're at it, while I have you on the spot here, would you give us a few instructions on how to conduct ourselves during a virtual meeting?
Sure. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the commission, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Panelists also have the ability to add pronouns after their names if they choose. Please do not alter the current naming convention. Simply add text after your name. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked the question. The chair will do their best to call on commission members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair Goodart, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Okay, first order of business is approval of minutes from 2 weeks ago. Can I see maybe a motion on that? Craig, in a second. Lois, seconded by Lois and Christian. Okay. Seeing no further discussion by any raised hands, the minutes are approved from July 14th. General public comment, item number 1. This is an item on all city agendas for general public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Julie, I noticed that there is a registrant under public comment who's also registered on item number 4. Let's see, who is that again?
His name is John Belknap, and I do see he is on the call.
Okay. John, were you intending on having general public comment and comment on item number 4 or just number 4?
No, just number 4.
Okay, thank you. We'll call on you when we get to that number then. Okay, so that's item number 1, disclosures and recusals. I am recusing myself on items number 2 and 3 and would ask Craig if you would be so kind as to act as chair for those 2 agenda items. Okay. No other disclosures or recusals, then we'll turn it over to Kevin for the agenda overview.
Thank you, Chair. For tonight's agenda, we start off, as the Chair mentioned, items 2 and 3 are Madison Metropolitan School District related improvements. Item 2 is related to West High School, and item 3 is related to East High School. The Urban Design Commission is an approving body on both of these items as public buildings. Next in the agenda, item number 4 is 12 North U Street. This is a redevelopment that is back for final approval. The UDC is also an approving body on this item. The final 2 items on tonight's agenda are informational presentations. Number 5 is 1954 East Washington Avenue. It's the Madison Development Corporation's development at the corner of East Washington, 2nd and Mifflin Streets. And then the final item of development discussion tonight is an informational presentation at 555 West Mifflin Street. Please note that there are staff reports on all of these items, and the public comment information was previously linked to you as we previously had it. So unless there's if there aren't any other questions for staff, that would conclude my agenda overview.
Okay, so before I turn it over to Craig, there were no recommendations by staff for consent agenda. I just want to make sure there are not any nominations for consent agenda before we before we move on. Okay, very good. So that brings us then to agenda item number 2. I will turn off my camera and microphone and join you back on number 4. It's all yours, Craig.
Thanks, Cliff. Kevin, could you introduce the speakers that we have tonight for 30 Ash Street, the West High School renovations, please?
Yes. Speaking on number 2, we have Paul Reislinger, registered in support and wishing to speak. And we also have Jackie Michaels available to answer questions. So that is the development team, both registered in support, and they'll be doing the presentation this evening for West High School.
All right, Paul, if you can hear us, feel free to start when you're ready.
I can. Thank you. I can hear you just fine. Kevin, would you be able to project the information for West?
Yes. One moment.
So while that's coming up, you will be seeing East and West High School today. You've seen La Follette previously, and just as a refresher, we're looking at additions to each school. All the schools are getting brand new MEP systems and air conditioning. We're renovating interior prioritized instructional areas, and typically new finishes throughout and all ADA upgrades. So if we go to the next slide, just indicating where West High School is located. This one is, Kevin, I think this is the fundraising packet. Do we have the base packet?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
I apologize.
And this will be a second item agenda that we'd like to speak about at the end of this first presentation. Sorry about that.
No, my apologies. I was.
Here we go. Okay, next slide. So this just indicates where the site is located along Regent Street at the intersection of Speedway and Highland Avenue. Next slide, please. This is just an indication of where we are working on the site. So the orange areas indicate additions, and let's start over by Ash Street on the right-hand side of your screen. We are providing a new Welcome Center addition for safety, security, and accessibility. As we move interior to the courtyard, again, we are adding a stair and other circulation to enhance that accessibility throughout the school. And then in the middle, you see these 2 squares that basically represents a elevator addition to provide accessibility to all 4 levels of the school. Moving up along Van Hise Avenue, we have a new parking area that is allowing for accessibility into the special ed wing, and we're providing 16 additional parking spaces. Moving south then, again along Regent and the intersection of Highland, that is the large athletic addition. And then very briefly, right across Highland Avenue, we are removing that baseball field. Title IX, to follow Title IX, we're not able to get a softball field on there. So we're turning that over to just turf field. The grass is going to remain. And then by the intersection of Highland and Speedway, we're implementing some field and track items in that area. Next slide, please. Oh, and I should say, I forgot to mention, we are doing a brand new turf field and retaining wall along Van Hise and Highland. This is just a close-up representation of that parking area along Van Hise. If we need it for discussion, we are aligning the entry to Chestnut Street and then the exit directly to the right. Next slide, please. This little indication of our landscaping areas. You can go to the next slide. We have some blow-up shots. So along Ash Street, where the new Welcome Center is located, and you'll see from the massing diagrams, we are depending on the landscape design to help draw your attention to the new main entry. We have a new accessible walkway that then wraps its way up to the new entry location, and then all new vegetation in that zone as well. Directly to the left of that, you'll see at the corner of Highland and Regent, we do have a little area of green space. The building cuts back to allow the view triangle, and then we're filling that with vegetation. Next slide, please. Again, here's just the vegetation around that new parking area on Van Hise Street. Since we had been removing some trees, we're adding additional trees in the parking lot alongside the turf field, and then enhancing the parking area with as much vegetation as we can. Next slide, please. What's really very interesting about this project is that you'll see the images, the exterior images. The Welcome Center is located off of Ash Street, right next to the Greek Revival entry. And we're really taking a look at how we can tie this building in. The National Historic Trust really dictates if you're adding on to a historical building, this one is not registered locally or nationally. It either needs to be very different or sympathetic and have its own identity and tie in. The staff and the neighborhood very much wants this building to blend with the existing architecture. So starting in the upper left, we began to analyze that Greek Revival entry. It is so prominent. We studied it for proportion, material, and the component parts of the architrave, base, middle, and top. That little diagram to the left then indicates how we interpreted that in the new design. The three-dimensional images then represent to you how we're using the precast and brick, although not exact matches, but we're integrating those parts into the new design so that the new addition has its own identity, but blends in with the historic architecture. One thing to note, there are coins on the corners of the buildings, and what we have done at the base of the new addition, every other brick course pushes back a half an inch, so we're taking that coining texture and wrapping it along the facade of the building. Next slide, please. For the athletic addition, starting in the upper left, the Stevens Gym, the 1960s edition, is onto that original 1930 building. So what we're doing is we're using those component parts to bring that precast banding around the building and then working in some windows down at the pedestrian level. Along Regent and Highland, that represents the 8-lane pool addition. That taller area is the new gymnasium. And then that lower part that wraps on Regent Street is a connecting corridor around those elements. The street views then illustrate how we're breaking that mass down to not only just reduce the scale of it, but also tie it into the neighborhood. And then there is an opportunity for some little seating walls with skate stops along those windows along Regent Street with some wall light sconces. And here as well, we are on the piers. We are doing that same coining method again to tie that architecture throughout the building. And then finally, at the lower left, you see the addition and how it seats itself at the intersection of Regent and Speedway. And then finally, in the lower right, you see the additions not only to the elevator addition in the background, but then the athletic addition and the new turf field in the foreground. Next slide, please. This is just all the materials. We are not going to be able to get an exact match to the brick, but we can get pretty close. Just by way of new construction and the fine mortar joints, everything will look much different than the existing building. And then the lower band represents the brick and the materials that we're using for the athletic addition to tie into the existing Stevens Gym. And then we have floor plans if needed for discussion after that. So that wraps up what I planned on presenting. And look forward to your comments.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. I see Alder Burris, you have your hand raised. Would you like to go first with any comments?
Nope, not right now, Craig. I just wanted to let everybody know I was about a minute late. Hopped in at 4:30 when I was having trouble connecting, so I wasn't sure if I was reflected in the attendees. Just wanted to make sure that was noted.
Got you noted. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. I do not believe there's any public comment on this. Is that correct, Kevin? It was only number 4?
That's correct. Unless Julie will double check, but as of a few minutes ago, Paul was the only speaker on this item.
That's correct.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. Any comments or questions from commissioners? Alder Burris, did you still have your hand raised? Did you raise it again? I wasn't paying attention.
Sorry, I didn't put my hand down. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
It's not raised.
Shane, go ahead.
Thanks. Just a couple of site questions for you, Paul. Wondering on the Van Heist, the north side, what you were thinking for the wall material, just because I know that limestone, those big limestone blocks are kind of a prominent piece of the street presence along that north and northwest corner. and curious if you are reusing them or if you're rebuilding the wall with the same material or using new material, or if you are using new material, are you able to reuse some of those big limestone blocks on site? And then we can start there.
So do you mean that edge of that parking tray right there, that existing concrete wall? That would remain.
No, I'm talking to the corner. I think you mentioned redoing the retaining wall at the edge of the playing field.
Oh, yes. That is, if you go back, Kevin, there is like an overall site plan where the turf field is at the corner of Highland and Van Heist. Yes, there is a retaining wall there. And we're replacing that with an interlocking block system because if you've been past there, that wall is beginning to heave.
Yeah.
So we're going to replace that. And if there's any other decorative limestone items there, we could certainly reuse it. But our thought is to put in an entirely new wall.
Okay.
Up at that corner there.
I would suggest you consider how it, and I know exactly what you're talking about, how the wall is starting to tip outwards and it's retaining a lot of grade in that location.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest kind of looking at how that wall material dovetails with the older wall that looks like it's to remain along Highland. And then I'd also suggest, if possible, reusing some of that limestone on site, just because it is such kind of wonderful material with that natural character, a character that is kind of tied to the school right now.
Okay. I think that's a very good point. I think we are replacing the entire wall along that whole length. But I think that's a good point about trying to reuse some of those limestone blocks. We do have opportunities on the site elsewhere. We could take a look at reclaiming some of that.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. I think the stone has a lot of character, and it, like I mentioned before, it has a lot of presence along those streetscapes, even though it is failing currently. And if there was a way to maybe even redesign or engineer the retaining with that material, in my opinion, that would be the best case scenario, just because I believe it has more character than what you're going to get out of a smaller kind of dimensioned concrete unit.
Okay.
And then my second question is, I'm just wondering if you could explain with the athletics addition, if you anticipate any changes to pedestrian desire paths, specifically coming from the street. And Regent Street can be very busy, and there's a lot of students crossing that street. And I've always felt like it was kind of sketchy with just how much traffic and how many people cross the street. And I just want to make sure that we're not creating an even worse condition where there's new desire paths, like potentially mid-block, and those kind of vehicular pedestrian conflicts.
Well, we are maintaining the existing pedestrian crosswalks. I know exactly what you mean. There's an incredibly high volume through there now. We have been in talks with city traffic engineering as well to understand what their long-range plans may be for that whole area. But as it stands right now, all those pedestrian lights and everything would remain in place, and we'd be reusing the existing pedestrian crosswalks.
Okay. Are there entries to that athletics addition along Regent Street?
There is. If you look in the center of that drawing, there's a little notch. And yep, right there. Yes, there is an entry to that athletic addition right there. Mm-hmm. So the thought is then, that people would cross at the next residential, street to the left, and then to the one that aligns with that Regent Street entry with the bridge. And then I believe there's one that kind of ties into the existing athletic addition.
Okay. And then where it notches more towards the Speedway Regent intersection,
Yes.
that there's no entry door there?
No, there's no entry. There is an egress door there, exit only.
Egress, okay.
So we're trying to keep all the access points to current access points on Regent, if you will.
Sure, okay. Okay, thanks. That's helpful for now, and definitely please consider the retaining wall material and that topic.
I will. That's a very good point. I can't promise that we will be able to reuse them, but we'll do our due diligence and investigate it. But I think there's certainly an opportunity. I can speak with Ken Psyche Design, and we can see where we could possibly integrate some of those reclaimed blocks in the landscape in other locations.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Shane. Great comments. Jessica.
Hi, and sorry I was late. My computer decided to reboot. And if you've already gone over this, I apologize. But what I'm curious about is for the new entry, how the landscaping or the materials or the location of it really inform people that this is the entry now, not the one under the portico, which is so obvious and where the eye is drawn. So
Right.
you kind of, I mean, in renderings, it's a little hard to tell. I think it looks really handsome, but it also kind of looks like it's tucked back in the corner a little bit. And I was just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Maybe, Kevin, if you zoom into either the upper right or the lower left, maybe the upper right might work. If we can zoom in a little bit to that. What we're doing, Jessica, so that W is really prominent. So when you come up those stairs, there's actually a sidewalk just to the left of that takes you to the new entry. And then currently, there is a sidewalk that runs kind of diagonal, almost parallel to Ash Street, starting at the corner of that gym addition. We'll have to wait for the images to come back. Then that accessible walkway brings you up to this little circular element that has its identity, and then all of that, there we go. So you see there's like a little circular element just to the left of that big red W. So all those paths lead to that, and then there's a circular path that leads you to the main entry. And we do have a canopy over it, so we'll be lighting it, and then also using a landscaping to help draw your attention to that entry. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. But you're right, that is a real challenge to have something such a dominant form, that Greek Revival entry. And although now they don't even use that as the entry, it's an exit only, and you enter under those stairs on a door on the side.
I know, it's bizarre. And I also I really enjoy seeing your analysis of the party and the proportion and all. That's just always really inspiring to see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Any other comments? Russell. I cannot hear you. You should be able to unmute yourself, Russell, I believe.
Oh, wow. Didn't know I had the powers. Thanks, Craig. Nice presentation, Paul. I'm just curious. I think we didn't spend much time on it. It's obviously maybe hidden, but maybe not. The backside of the new gym addition.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best view is bottom right of A23. Could you just, is that going to be an exposed area? I'm picturing, I don't know how they use that field. And is that a very public facing area back there? And can you just speak to that facade and maybe what thoughts went into
Sure.
the end of the end zone here? I never thought I'd say this on a UDC meeting, but man, I wonder if that's kind of close to the end of that football field. And I'm not an expert on how that design works. But anyway, yeah, if you could just talk us through that a little bit, maybe.
Sure, Russell. Thanks for the question. This is a really good example of trying to put 5 pounds in a 10-pound bag.
Yeah.
So if starting over by Van Heist, that part of the building, that's the pool area. It's an 8-lane pool. So we do have windows in that. And then as you move to the center, that's more support and back of house. And then we have the gymnasium. And then there's a lower part with some windows, and that is locker room and meeting space. Now, they wanted to we're kind of limited by the geometry of the pool and everything to get it to fit on the site. And in this district, we can have a 0 lot line on Regent Street, but we didn't go exactly to the lot line. We held it off a couple of feet. They want this turf field to be competition size for junior varsity soccer and football and lacrosse. And they were pretty steadfast in achieving that. So we were able to fit it in. And then what we're going to do to protect the building is we are going to have nets there. You see there's like 4 posts. So there will be netting that will come up above that building line to prevent the balls and everything from landing on the roof. And then likewise, we have another net on the Van Heist side to do the same there and prevent those balls from going over onto the street. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I didn't even notice the netting, so thank you for pointing that out.
Sure.
Yeah, I think so. I don't have any concerns. It's just an interesting little area back there, or big area, I should say. And
it is.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks, Russell. Jessica, you still have your hand raised. Did you have any more comments? No problem. Just wanted to double check. And then as other commissioners are pondering, asking any more questions, I just wanted to reach back out to Kevin. So there was the fundraising packet. It wasn't specifically an agenda item. Is that something that it can be presented as well? Or are we just looking for feedback? Because I know that was part of the request as far as the staff report for looking for like informational guidance for that as well.
Yes, correct. Staff was contacted after the initial submittal regarding, I guess, a second phase of the project or a larger addition of certain funding came to fruition. And so as the applicant mentioned in their presentation, they do have additional slides to talk about that. I believe there's a little bit more detail than what was in the packet when it was originally provided to you. So you could request that the applicant walk through that. Procedurally, I would say the commission has got a few options here. First option would be to make their motion just on this main piece that we've been discussing up till now. They could make a motion on both elements. If there's any conditions of approval that staff could sign off on. Or third, they could take action on the main part of the presentation and then request that the other details come back with a new application if it's known that funding goes through. So there's a few procedural options the commission has, but it would be up to you, Chair, if you'd like to have the applicant walk through those additional slides.
So I guess I will poll out to the commissioners. We did see this ahead of time, so we've had a chance to review that. So being time sensitive, I would ask if there's any additional questions or comments that folks raise their hand, we can talk through it, and then we can include those comments in any motion, knowing that that part of it will say is like an informational portion, that they're not asking for approval on that. They're just asking for approval on the original submittal. So any other comments or questions, Russell?
I was going to make an attempt at a motion. I'd like to move for approval, noting Shane's comments about treatment of the retaining wall and potential reuse of the high character limestone. And hopefully, Shane, I'd welcome a friendly amendment if I could articulate any of that better. But that would be for final approval. Final approval.
All right. There's a lot of hands. Oh, Kevin, why don't you see your hands raised? Why don't you jump on in?
Sorry, just I know we're in mid motion, so slightly not timely here, but I saw Paul had raised his hand too. I just wanted to reiterate my understanding is that the applicant, I believe, was seeking not just an informational, but potentially a motion on the other component as well. So I just wanted to note that he had raised his hands, and that was my understanding as well. So I just wanted to note that for the commission.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Paul, so we'll address the original motion on the first edition, and then if a subsequent motion comes on the subsequent item, we can do that one at a time.
That was my exact question, Mr. Chair. If the funding does come through, that's why we submitted the fundraising information. Is that possible to handle as an administrative update if we proceed with the fundraising images? Just so I'm clear.
Yeah, so we have a motion on the floor, so I'm going to open it back up to Russell just to clarify his motion. Was that for the original packet, or was that for the entire submitted project?
My motion is for the original packet.
Okay, so let's handle that one first. So Shane and Jessica, you guys have both of your hands raised. Was that a second, Jessica? No. Shane, was that a second? Okay, so we do not, let's call for a second to that motion. Is there anybody else that wanted to second that motion? So with no second to that motion, comments on that original motion? We do not have a second on it yet. Jessica, did you have comments on that original motion?
No, not on the motion, but I had another question. Is that allowed?
Let's take care of this motion first, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so we had no second, so that motion dies. Not approved, so I will come back to Jessica with your question.
Yeah, sorry. I was looking at the athletic field too, and just remembering some of the discussion that went on with Edgewood's athletic field. And I wondered if there's been any neighborhood input on this, and if there's lighting and audio mentioned yet.
To answer your second question, there is no lighting in the area. We are just running electrical out there for a scoreboard. There hasn't been any comments that we are aware of that the district has received from any of the neighbors. Primarily, the only comments we've received regard construction times and disruption of local streets.
Thanks. Watch for that stuff. Edgewood had quite a discussion.
Shane.
Thanks. So, Russell, this could have maybe come as a friendly amendment as a second to your motion, but just kind of want to clarify a few things. Sorry, and coming back to the wall issue, because I am reminded as I look at Street View that there's two different wall materials. And there's more of a masonry wall that is along Highland. Let's call it more like the southern half of Highland, which is, I believe, is part of the wall that's actually failing, but also the part that has the most architectural character and some strong ties to stonework you see around Madison, much of which by Franz Aust, like as you would see in Hoyt Park and other areas in Madison. So I think that's a pretty significant piece, and I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost, that does either become repaired or remain. It doesn't appear on the plans like that piece is being replaced or disrupted. What is indicated on the plans is more of the north part, which is kind of more of a landscape stone, a landscape block, large limestone blocks. And I think my previous comments were directed more towards that piece. And so I think all those previous comments are still valid. But I do want to just add, and maybe for clarification, Paul, that masonry wall that utilizes the limestone is to remain.
Okay. Yeah, we can certainly take a look at that, Shane, and see, how we can tie into that masonry wall and kind of, blend everything together.
Sure. So it's
that wall that runs parallel.
Yeah, there's an emergency access break in the walls right now.
Yep,
So there's already kind of a natural gap,
right?
And it's the masonry wall that starts south of that emergency access point.
Got it.
And Shane, just to elaborate, and I know Kevin, you have your hand raised again. I went to Google Streets as well. It does not look like that portion is a retaining wall either. It's more of just like a pedestrian or a separation wall.
Correct.
Yep. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, make sure I got Shane's motion correctly, and I also just wanted to note that because I at least as I understand it, that's a site design related item. The UDC's approving authority is with the building itself. You can make certainly advisory comments. This one is going to the Plan Commission for a conditional use alteration. So that could be an advisory recommendation to them or to the applicant team in general. But the binding approval authority of the commission is with the building itself. But Shane, just to make sure that I understand it, the language I have is that to recommend utilizing the existing limestone as part of the retaining wall. And I want to make sure that I'm getting that as specific as possible.
Yes, to reuse the existing landscape limestone. So that's a suggestion, but also kind of a stronger advisory to retain the masonry wall that occurs south of that.
Okay, thank you.
And Shane, you were commenting, you just had a comment on that wall. I do not believe I heard a motion. Was that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other comments or inspirations for a motion? Lois. You should be able to unmute yourself.
There you go. I wasn't able to do it initially. Paul, thank you for the presentation. I think this is a really nice project. And I don't have any issues with the design of the building components itself. As a matter of fact, I would have seconded the motion, but I was thinking Shane and Jessica wanted to second or add something. But I would make a motion for final approval with the comments about the landscape wall and accept the potential changes for if there were a donor, because after reviewing those, I don't see any concerns with those small additions either. You're muted now, Craig.
Thank you, Lois. Do we have a second by anybody? Jessica, we have a second. Any comments or questions on the motion? Russell?
Okay. There's a newbie question here that I'm not used to seeing the alternate design presented as kind of a separate package in that way. I mean, I know it was attached as one file, but as the public and has it gone through the same process as the main packet that was presented to us today regarding the third floor addition with the extra fundraising? Maybe that's a question for you, Kevin. Could you speak to that maybe?
I can speak to that. I don't know from what's been presented at a neighborhood level. I think the detail that was in the packet was not part of the original Plan Commission packet. I'm not sure the applicant's plans of presenting that when it's at Plan Commission for the conditional use here in I believe a week from Monday. So I would I guess if it's okay with the chair, ask the applicant to confirm the neighborhood side of the process on that.
Sounds good. Kevin, Paul, if you want to talk through where you're at with neighborhood approvals, etc.
Oh, sure. The neighborhood, everybody has seen the option. And then the fundraising, the footprint of
I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but Paul, I'm hearing Paul you're very choppy, Paul.
Robotically, almost, Paul.
Okay. Is that better?
No, it is not.
Was it fine before?
It was fine before. It's just this last round of speaking here.
I wonder if I need to leave and rejoin the meeting, maybe.
Oh, do you have a battery or something in your microphone?
Do I? No, I just got the same way.
Do you have something plugged in that you can unplug and try plugging them back in?
Oh, I see. Is that any better?
Yes, there we go.
There you
It
go,
is
Paul.
better?
Yes.
Crystal
good. Okay. So the athletic addition, for the fundraising, the footprint remains the same. The only thing that changes is that we are adding a running track and 2 lanes to the pool. That's why some of those elements of the building stretched out a little bit. We had to add another stair. So everything fits within. The changes are very subtle. The district has been on board with it. We have not directly shared that with the neighborhood at this point. They are in a fundraising phase, but I can certainly, if that's a condition of the approval, we can certainly reach out.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Sure.
All right, so we have a motion that was seconded. So I'm going to ask if there is no other hands raised, we will do a approval by unanimous consent. All right, Paul, thank you very much. That closes out that agenda item. And now I believe you're up for agenda item number 2, across town to the other high school.
And just to confirm for the registrations, I believe Paul is the only one we have listed right now to speak on this one. Chair, sorry to be out of order. I just wanted to confirm who made the second on the motion. Okay, Jessica. Okay, I had Lois making the motion and Jessica second. Thank you very much. All right, and so without further ado, I will pull up the plans and I will flip the slides for Paul in just a moment.
Thank you, Kevin.
And while we're waiting for those drawings, we did present to landmarks because East High School is registered as a City of Madison landmark. So we did go through that process, and I believe that's attached to your meeting minutes or the agenda item, with the one caveat that we need to find out a location for the date stone, and that's certainly something that we're going to do. Next slide, please. The location of East High School is right at the corner of East Washington and 4th Street on the east side of Madison. Next slide. So on this site plan, there's very little landscaping. Really, again, what we're doing is a lot of interior renovation. And then these orange areas indicate where we are adding on to the building. That little rectangle next to the parking lot, that's a brand new welcome center that pulls it out from the building and makes it more accessible. There's a box along 4th Street. We are adding to the cafeteria space and then fully renovating and doing an addition to the music department on the 2nd floor. And then there's a box that's kind of in the middle of the building, and that is a 2nd floor athletic fitness area that we're adding to the 2nd floor. That's kind of hidden from the street, but we need to take a look at those views as well. Next slide. This is just a blow up of that entry area. We are repaving and restriping that parking area and then adding some handicap parking up towards that entryway, again, making it all accessible. And that just indicates the extent of the additions in those locations. Next slide, please. The landscape plan. So starting in the middle of the building, you see there's that second floor addition, and there is some landscape planting up there that will be repaired and enhanced, right? Some of it is sort of died off, so that would be replaced with low shrubbery and other perennials. There are some concrete tables up there that will be relocated in that area. And then moving to the south part of the page, that bigger addition parallel to 4th Street, we do have some low plantings along there, some evergreens, grasses, perennials in that area, an opportunity for some annuals. And then there is some plantings alongside that sidewalk to buffer between the parking area alongside the Welcome Center. Next slide, please. Just a blow up so you can see some of the plantings, the density, and then the species are off to the right. And in this case, there are some existing retaining walls along 4th Street. Those remain in place. We're not touching those at all. Next slide, please. What's really interesting about this is a collegiate Gothic architecture style. Frank Riley was the architect in 1922, and he felt this was one of his greatest works. So in taking a look at this building, we certainly want to be like when you were looking at the upper right, really taking a look at the pieces and parts of collegiate Gothic. You have these Gothic arches and windows that you see. You'll see that portico or that recessed entryway. There are bas relief decorative panels, not only on the tower, but even in between the windows. And it's really interesting because at the second floor, there's that relief panel between the windows, but at the lower levels, it doesn't appear. There's this tracery around the windows and just a tremendous amount of detailing. You have crenellated parapets that you see around the building and the spires. And certainly that detail then manifests itself in different ways around the building. It's simply an absolutely wonderful building. And then that lower slide on the bottom in the middle, that indicates the view that you'll see that fitness area. And we have a perspective of that later. Next slide, please. So starting in the upper left, kind of going through that same exercise that we did on West, really taking a look at the existing building and understanding the component pieces, parts, proportions, and rhythms of the building, and then applying that to the new addition. And again, here we are trying to learn from those architectural moves and integrate that into the new designs, that it stands alone, has its own identity, but it could be removed someday, and then East High School still retains its original architectural identity. And then the lower or the middle left indicates that view of the new main entry from that corner of 4th and East Washington. And we're certainly trying to not copy what you did at the old main entry on East Wash, but try and design it in the spirit of. So then the next image to the right in the middle, you start to see how that Welcome Center has some precast detail relief that just really kind of represents those bas relief panels and the crenellation and the detailing around the windows. And then you see the addition to the cafeteria and the music. And what we've done with those 4 large windows, we've actually projected those out, if you will, as a bay window from the facade to give it some depth. And we're bringing that banding and precast along all the way. And then the lower left, you see there's some textured brick in the middle. We've pulled out some bricks a half an inch to create some detail. And then finally, that last entry or that last image shows the accent lighting on the wall to create the entry and then the detailing of those precast elements. Next slide. Just other views as you're terminating Mifflin Street, that would be the view of that. And that's just all vision glass to the west. And then the aerial view in the middle. And now when you get to the middle right, you'll see where that fitness area and mechanical addition goes on top of the building. And we are enclosing that in corrugated metal panel, a redder tone to be more harmonious with the brick as opposed to like a dark bronze of the window frame, which we feel would stand out too much on that elevation. Next slide, please. The bricks, actually, we're using the same brick that was used on that original 1960 edition, or same mix. obviously over time looks a little bit different, but it's that same kind of brick to tie into the existing masonry, the precast, and the other metal panel accents. And then you see the corrugated metal panel enclosure around the fitness area at the bottom. And then again, we do have floor plans and other items behind this material sheet, but I'll end that part of the presentation there.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. Kevin must just lower his hand. He did that quick before a call. All right, thank you very much. I don't believe there is any other public comments as we've discussed before. So any comments, questions by the commissioners? Shane.
Just one very quick question. Does this project have a separate fundraising package like the previous project had?
No, it does not.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Tom.
More an observation, or maybe it is a question to Paul. Whether the new main entrance, visitor center, whatever, really is just surrounded by a parking lot. Unlike the west that had a nice landscaped segue to it or pathway, this one just sits at the edge of a parking lot. I'm sure you'll tell me every one of those slots are necessary, but is there any way to add a little bit more green space or some of the same elements that you showed at West in terms of leading up to this main entrance? It just seems a bit perfunctory and bare.
That's a very good question, Thomas. We did talk about that, and we showed a little bit more green. As you can imagine, parking probably more so, well, at both schools, West and East in particular here as well, is at a real premium. And the district had a difficult time removing some of that parking to get that additional green space. They felt they really needed that number of parking in that location to kind of meet at least their what they have currently.
The cars continue to win. Thank you.
That's a good comment, Tom. And when I look at that is too, just the one comment I had, if you tried to put very small strip landscaping, the chances of that being overwhelmed by salt, snow, all the other, it might be a losing battle over time. So yeah, I understand your comments. It's one of those really difficult challenges we run into.
I can tell you, we did look at trying to slide that parking closer to East Washington, but a couple of things at play here. We're working against the approved referendum budget, because if we move it, there's some electrical transformers and other items there that we would have to move, and that really made sliding that parking cost prohibitive.
All right, thanks, Tom. Any other questions? Lois.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm so happy to see East High getting a renovation. It was sorely needed. I really like everything that you've done. The only thing that kind of feels odd to me is the overhang on the main entrance. It's kind of heavy, and it doesn't seem to be as I don't know, the knife point, it doesn't seem to integrate with anything else on the building. And I'm wondering where that particular element is coming from, because I would almost see it just as rather than the knife point just kind of coming out as a flat extension of what you have on the I guess it would be the south side of the building, or south side of that entrance.
Oh, you're saying why is, that knife point, really, that's just nothing more than a gesture to the movement of how you're entering the building.
Okay, it just seems foreign to me. It feels there's like no reference to it with this style of architecture, and it feels a little like a modern. And I guess I would see if you could find something that would feel, if you need the overhang and you want to accentuate a deeper overhang, is to find something that would be a little bit more in keeping with the style of what this entrance is.
Sure. We could do that.
Maybe it's just flat then, which
right. No, that's a good point.
And that's all I had. Yeah, that's the only comment I had. I do want to. It's a shame that we can't add more green to the entrance, and I don't know if there's even an opportunity for some built-in, raised bed kind of. Very small, something that would just bring some green to that entrance.
Thank you very much, Lois. I had the same comment as well as the entry, so I'm glad you brought that up too, wondering what the inspiration was and how that came into it. Any other questions, comments, or motions?
Well, I could make a motion if no one else if there's no comments.
Sounds like a great opportunity, Lois.
Okay. Well, I'll make a motion for final approval with just administratively, simplifying the entrance canopy to be a little bit more in keeping with the architectural style.
All right. Do we have a second to that motion? Russell, second? All right. If you guys want to lower your hands down. And I'll ask if it's no further hands raised, we will grant final authorization by unanimous consent. Thank you very much, Paul. And Cliff, if you're still there, I tried to keep on time. We'll bring you back in to take on over.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you, Craig. Now we move to unfinished business, item number 4, 12 North Few Street.
Thank you, Chair. From the development team, we have one registered speaker, and that would be John Seaman, who's registered to speak in support. From the development team, we have Kevin Yeska registered in support and available to answer questions. We do have 3 other speakers, public comments registered, so we'll do that after the applicant's presentation.
Great, and we've seen this a couple times before, so if you want to just give us some highlights on what's changed, and then we can listen to the public comment. Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thank you. And thanks for the time in reviewing this for final approval. Again, my name is John Seaman. The project overview is it's a redevelopment involving a partial demolition of an existing building at 12 North Few with a second-story addition, as well as a new adjacent 2-story addition. Next slide, please. Thank you. The new building is a mixed-use building with 8 residential units on the second floor and 8 commercial units on the first floor. There's no off-street parking, and we have 17 total bike stalls, 8 of which are enclosed inside the building. Next slide, please. The building is within 1 block of the East Washington corridor at the corner of North Few Street and Curtis Court. This survey shows the footprint of the existing building, as well as the portion of the building we are reusing in blue. Next slide. This shows the proposed site plan and layout of the 8 first floor commercial units. Next slide. And this shows the 8 proposed residential units on the second floor directly above the first floor commercial spaces. Next slide. We have removed the off-street parking for clarity relative to the entries and the commercial entries. And we've added transom windows and entry canopies above those commercial entry doors to create what we think is a much clearer visual, more intuitive path to those commercial entries. This plan also shows the entry sequence and travel distance for the walk-up residential entries, along with the security provisions for those entries, including we have 10 24/7 recorded video surveillance cameras in full view of the property, along with the monitoring associated with that. There's a large blind spot security visual mirror in that southwest corner. And we have automatic dusk to dawn lighting at all the doors and the pathways along the sides of the building, as well as this drawing is also showing the locations of the residents only, no trespassing signs. Next slide, please. This shows the east and north elevations. It really highlights the difference between the commercial and residential entry doors. Next slide. And this sheet shows the south and the west elevations. Next slide. What we're showing here is the type of exterior bench we could use, we're proposing using along Curtis Court, as well as the planter box with the falling ivy on top of that southern CMU wall on the south side of the building. Next slide. This is a rendering looking northeast along Curtis Court, depicting the canopies above those commercial entry doors. Next slide. And this is a rendering looking southwest down Curtis Court from the intersection at North Few Street, depicting those existing trees remaining. Next slide. And this is the landscape plan showing the design for the plant species, planting locations, and the extents of the pervious pavers along Curtis Court. We obviously have further design and project information in the submitted materials, and we're available for questions and comments. Thanks much.
Thank you. We'll open it now for the public comment portion of the presentation.
Our first speaker is registered neither in support nor opposition is John Belknap, followed by Karen Banaszak.
Okay, first, regarding East High School, as a retired East teacher under Milton Pike, I would not want to see any construction at East without input from the SRO or MPD. It's pretty essential. Now, we're dealing with Block 5B of Urban Design District number 8. My comments are strictly limited to what's missing. The first thing is mechanicals. There's nothing on the roof. There's nothing in any of the apartments, nothing in the shops to indicate heating or air conditioning. Are we going to have the whole building heated by one central source as it is currently? Or will there be AC units hanging out of the windows and over the doors of the shops? The second thing is parking. Of course, there's no parking. But this block, 5B, is one of the most dynamic in Madison. You probably know that the Wisconsin Youth Symphony Orchestra is planning to buy the entire Avenue lounge area, including parking lots. They plan to swap one parking lot next to Scooter Therapy for the budget auto rental lot owned by Noel Johnson. So the entire block is changing, and it would really be a nice thing if it could be coordinated, but then this is Madison, so we'll go separate ways. But there's no parking at all. With the Youth Symphony in the same block, there's going to be a huge demand for parking in this area, and there's nothing available except on East Walsh. So that's, I think, a major thing. If the owner could eliminate unit F on the corner, that would solve a lot of problems. It would open up some parking. And then the last thing that's missing is a setback. Now, this is a particular district, Block 5B. The urban design document requires as a minimum in 5B, the setback for east-west streets be 15 feet. As a matter of fact, the requirements state the setback for the new building shall be as shown in 3B, 15 feet. The Urban Design Commission, however, may allow greater setbacks. It doesn't say anything about diminishing them, eliminating them. So the last thing is that the setback revision is totally unacceptable. That ends my comment.
Okay, we'll cover all of the public comments, and then we can address the issues together at the conclusion.
Next is Karen Banaszak.
Go ahead. Oh, hi. Okay. Well, this is the first time I've seen this particular rendition of the project. I'm not a computer whiz, and so anyway, my concern is what I heard John saying about the elimination of the 15 feet, or are you still saying there's a 6-foot setback on the first part of the project, and then 15 feet where the present day garage door is? Okay, and so that's one thing. I guess that's the major thing. And then also I had a question on the drawings where the permeable pavers were, how much of the ground was going to be covered by that particular help for the runoff of all the polluted the polluted water that comes off not only the streets, but the parking lots and from all the car traffic. So I guess that was,
solar panel.
And we had asked about solar paneling, and there's nothing, about that on there. And also as John said too, I know he did a lot of research that these mechanicals that he's talking about, and I would be interested in knowing about that as well. Yeah. So I guess, Jeff, is there anything?
Lighting.
Oh, lighting at night. Yes. We had asked about lighting because, we sleep here, and presently the lighting is such that it's pretty easy to sleep. And, but we were wondering about that. And I think that I'm thinking that. Oh, and then also this is possibly nothing that comes up during this discussion, but wondering about, with the construction, we live here, Curtis Court is 17 feet wide. Where's all the staging going to be? And again, there will be more construction on our street. And then also I was still curious about the results of and maybe you guys have covered this another time, but curious about the soil testing and what kind of dust you're going to be sending up into the air, because with the big housing that went up on the corner of Few in East Washington, we had a lot of dust. And for those of us who don't have central air conditioning, it's a difficulty. So, or a concern, about.
I'm sorry, but that is not an urban design issue of the dust. We have no power to control that or make comment on that.
Okay, but you also don't know the results of the soil testing?
We do not know the results of the soil testing.
Engineering would know that?
That is something you could take up with staff and find out how you could get that information.
But you wouldn't go ahead with the project if there was problems or?
We are here to look at the building's aesthetic design qualities, its materials, and its contextual fit in the neighborhood, not soil testing or dust.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking my questions.
Yes, and your other comments though are pertinent, and following the public testimony, we will make sure the applicant follows up with those questions.
Okay, because again, we kind of live kitty corner from the back of the building, and so if a lot of the exhaust or those kinds of things come out of the back of the building, there's air conditioners, things like that, concerning about the noise. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our last registered speaker is Jeff Renke.
There is nobody by that name.
That's all I've got on my end.
Okay, so no other registrants. We can, I think we can pretty quickly dispense with the setback concern, right? Kevin, wasn't that a text amendment to the design district that was already approved?
Correct. And as noted as the staff report and as reviewed by the Urban Design Commission when this was previously here, there was a corresponding text amendment that revised the setback in this block. It actually created a block 5C that had a different setback range. That was approved by the Common Council in June. And there was an approved setback range of 5 to 20 feet for east-west streets in the district. And that was, again, recommended for approval by UDC when it was here previously and approved by the Common Council on June 1st.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess we could invite the applicant back to clarify things like rooftop HVAC. I know we talked about that briefly last time, permeable pavers, but then of course, the elephant in the room is the parking and the no off-street parking when you have curb cuts and big old garage doors and driveways in front of the building. So we'll probably be interested in hearing an explanation on the parking. But if you could just help us quickly with the pavers and the HVAC issue first, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the HVAC, we have talked a little bit about this, and the drawings indicate louvers on the second story windows. These are integrated louvers with the frame of all that fenestration on the second floor. We have through wall units, commonly understood as PTACs, all electric heating and cooling for those second floor units, all of which are generally pretty small residential units, and the PTACs will be sized accordingly. As far as the first floor goes, we're planning on, again, these are also very small commercial units. So we will be heating them with ceiling hung Modine units and cooling the spaces with ceiling fans. Given the lower level location, the orientation for the building, from a solar perspective, we think that's going to be a really efficient, energy efficient approach. So that's how we're handling that. The permeable pavers are called out both on the landscape plan as well as the site plan. a 2.0, and they exist primarily along Curtis Court. It's pretty well, I think it's pretty well indicated where they are and how much of them there are. There was also a question about lighting. The lighting is indicated on a 2.0 as well as the elevations, both sheets of the elevations. We have wall sconces at every door and intermittent wall sconces along the pathways of the building. And yeah, that is the extent of the lighting.
Thank you. And I think you, and we can all rest assured that per city ordinance, your neighbors will not be experiencing any significant light spillover. That's just not allowed, or any direct glare by our current lighting ordinance.
Right.
Okay, so maybe, and I think you did describe how you're handling the not driveways and the with benches and additional green space. So I guess I would open it up to any questions or comments to the commission, because as we look through our staff report, or our minutes rather, the questions was kind of wayfinding and clarifying the space in front of the commercial units. And so there has been a change in the design there. And I'd look to the commission for any questions, comments, or a motion. Lois.
You know, I love the aesthetics of this building. I think what I'm getting kind of hung up on is it does feel like it's super crowded. And there's some functional things that, you know, for instance, there are 2 curb cuts on Pew Street, but there's no place to go with a car. I think in a past meeting, I asked if these were future garages, if somebody happened to get both, and I asked about separation between the workstations. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. And so I don't know if there's any clarity about whether these would actually potentially have a car in them, because I don't understand the curb cut on Pew Street. I don't know where mailboxes would go. Is there an address for just Curtis Court, or where do the folks that live upstairs, where's their mailbox? And I also want to mention the dumpster location has 8, enough for 8, but Madison has the refuse and recycling, and so that would double what they have shown here. So I see some real functional limitations with the size of the site, with some of the practicalities of occupying it. And lastly, these are live work. Is the lower level, the Modine units, is that circulated air? Is that any fresh air potential? And there's no restrooms on those first floors. So what's the plan for that if somebody works here for 8 hours a day? That's it.
You should be, John Seaman should be unmuted.
Great, thank you. Yes, all again, excellent questions. I want to try and hit them on the head. First of all, this is not a live work. It is a mixed use building. What we're really trying to do is have the flexibility down the road to have more of a live work scenario. By keeping those curb cuts open and having the future potential of a drive condition into the first floor. That's really the goal. And right now, what we're trying to do is not have them be seen as parking stalls. We don't want parking to be seen off-site, blocking the sidewalk at all. We're happy to put signs there accordingly. We've even considered bollards and would go down that route if it makes sense. We didn't like the design aspect of that. But there's probably a way to do that if the commission thought that it made sense. That's what we're really looking for, is the future flexibility to do that, to have it be more live work. Right now, it's just mixed use. And that's that way, particularly from a zoning and use standpoint. Otherwise, we'd be looking at a conditional use in some form, fashion. The trash and recycle, we have the 8 96-gallon bins. We're planning 4 of those for trash, 4 of those for recycle. We're told, we believe that that's sufficient at this stage of the game. So that's why we've had the quantity and size allocated that we have. You asked about mail. Very good question. We're seeing mail slots at each of the entries. We think that's the right thing at this time. It is a very tight site. Make no mistake about that. And as a result, we're really trying. It's one of the reasons we're addressing the separation of the entries and the walk-ups for residential versus commercial in the way that we are. Hopefully that answers some question. I'm certainly happy to continue.
So is there a barrier then if somebody did, in future use, get the entire, unit A, first and second floor, can they actually put a car down there by code, or is there a fire separation there too?
We would have to have a fire separation, and not only that, we would also have to go through, at that point, now we would have to go through a conditional use. If that first floor was also going to be part of a residential unit, and Kevin Furco, please correct me or edit anything that I'm saying here, that would be a change that we would have to get approved through Plan Commission at the very least. That's my understanding. Kevin can address that.
And then what about the restroom and any other, are these occupiable for somebody to come and set up shop? I know you had a whole list of potential uses for these first floor units, and does a Modine unit and fans and no restroom or plumbing that I can see at all, is that functional for somebody to set up shop there?
Great question. So we will have to have restrooms. We're seeing that as the next phase of a project. Single accommodation restrooms in each of those units are going to be a given. Exactly where they locate and how they get laid out, we see as part of the next phase of the project to get a permit to do it. We think we can. We think. Still at this stage, heat and fans, ceiling fans for circulating air and keeping the space cool, again, given its location and orientation, make the most sense. So yes, that's where we are.
And are the addresses for these all on Curtis Court and Few Street? In which case, I don't think the Postal Service will walk around a building looking for slots everywhere.
We have not gone down that path yet. I can't answer those questions yet.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but just to follow up with Lois, I think that the final plans would need to show toilet rooms there, because without toilet rooms or mechanical ventilation, the only thing they could be used for is a non-occupied space, like a garage occupancy. And since they have garage doors and curb cuts and driveways in front of them, how can we sit here and listen to you say that there's not going to be any cars parked under these units? I just don't understand. Either we're a little naive, or there's something that I think the rest of this commission just isn't grasping.
Cliff, I appreciate your candor. We have not shown the build out of commercial spaces in there primarily because we haven't seen the need to do it yet. If that's something that you need to see in terms of primary functional program pieces for the commercial space for approval, I suppose that's certainly something we can do. We were hoping to have the commercial tenants begin to weigh in on that a little bit. But certainly something we could do.
Well, I think ultimately it would be something that would kick in when you sent plans to building inspection for a building permit. But to me, it looks and smells like a residential garage. You're not showing the entire first floor as open where you could subdivide it maybe into 2 spaces instead of 4 spaces. To me, it just looks and feels like it's going to be an apartment above ultimately with a garage underneath. And that's a problem, of course, that you mentioned, is that it would require a conditional use that you're not applying for. So I think that's just, maybe it's me. I think that maybe some others here on the commission have that uneasy sense that, it's going to be difficult to have a commercial enterprise there without any mechanical ventilation or air conditioning, and just a ceiling fan and a Modine unit and a garage door.
Well, and the reason I really wanted some clarity on that, because if you're going to put another through-wall unit in, where is it on all of these? Because, now you have the residential folks coming in. Are they going to have a through-wall unit right next to their door? I'm not sure, that we see enough detail in order to kind of comment on the full building, not knowing what other penetrations there may be in the rest of the building, depending on what goes in those units.
Yeah, and if it was me, I wouldn't mind if it was a garage unit under the apartment, and and people, instead of on the street, parked in underneath it. I'm not personally opposed to some off-street parking on an apartment. It just seems like you're insisting that can't happen, and it won't happen, but it looks like it's set up to be a perfect opportunity for it to happen. Okay, I've said enough. I'm going to turn it over to Russell and then Craig.
I just try to think about it another way, and I think I asked this question before, and I apologize, I don't remember the answer. Is it, John? Is it truly the intent to have that mirror finish on the glass of the garage doors and the door going to the lower units?
Russell, it is not the intention to have a mirror finish. No.
Okay. My understanding is the intent of the garage door from previous presentation is a loading function and a just giving you a larger moving materials in and out of that lower unit. Is that a fair statement?
It certainly could be used for that. We really see them as operable storefronts in so many ways. We like the flexibility, again, associated with those large openings. We like the retail or commercial presence that it can bring to a small commercial user. That's what we really like about it. You probably also heard me mention that the kind of scale and size is reminiscent of other, obviously, garage doors in a more of a residential neighborhood. We like that visual tie to its context. So all those were factors, Russell, in the direction that we've chosen.
But I think my question to you then is there an operable window solution here in lieu of a garage door that you might be able to help us consider to get around this concern about what, I think the concern is that we're feeling too much flexibility about that lower unit and it being used for an inappropriate purpose. I guess is my concern. So I think, is there an operable window that can achieve your goals here? Is that something you've studied?
Well, it certainly could be all fixed storefront, right? Or partially fixed storefront with some operable component to it. There's no question about that. Again, what we were really liking about this is that it did all of those things that I mentioned earlier in one assembly. And that's what we were really liking about it. We liked the idea that, again, we could have future flexibility in terms of the use of that space and have these become more live work if down the road.
Well, I suppose I'll say something on the other side of the coin. I actually do appreciate the simplicity of the lower unit. I appreciate creating an opportunity for a use down there that perhaps doesn't need, say, your typical amount of air conditioning, and you're giving an opportunity for someone that just can bring in some natural ventilation and open that door and use the space in that way. So I do see benefits. Yeah, thanks. You've answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. And I would ask just to consider, Lois, your comment and concern about not really understanding all the penetrations. We feel like the elevations on 3 and 3.0 and 3.1 all show the locations of all the through wall units. Everywhere we have an integral louver, that's where we have a through wall unit. We obviously don't see anything like that on the first floor because we don't have those through wall units, right? So I appreciate the question. I just wanted to point that out.
My concern about the penetrations was for future first floor. I see the ones on the second.
Yes, I see. Yep.
Yeah, if somebody on the first floor wanted to put an air conditioning unit in, where would a slot be reserved for a louver or another PTAC unit or something?
Right, and right now that's not part of what we would be providing. They wouldn't have that opportunity. We think that we believe this is a really energy efficient solution, given the really small size of these. I mean, at the end of the day, they're probably 620 usable square feet. Something like that.
Okay, Craig, you still have your hand raised.
Thanks, Cliff. Yeah, John, I think what, some of the struggles we have with other TIs is that once they come back, and we talk about a whole bunch of different things of, blocking storefront where they, end up putting restrooms or back of house. So I think what I would want to see is, if you're making this an occupiable space, how you would plan to do it, so we could see how it's feasible, especially if you're going to do this at future phase, which means it's already occupied. So how would you be putting the restroom in if it was an occupied space, showing how the mechanicals would work? Not just, I think we would do it this way, but this is how we'd actually make it an occupied space. Otherwise, if you're proposing mixed use with nothing on the inside, is like mini storage the only thing that could be used? I'm just wondering actually what could be unoccupiable space other than like storage. Because you can't put automobiles in there, like we talked about fire separation. So what actually would be the use of that space as currently proposed?
Well, we think that there's a number of small businesses that could go in those spaces. I don't know why they couldn't. Obviously, they would need to have primary functional components like a restroom. We recognize that. I think what I hear is the concern is that what would be keeping us from putting a restroom close to the exterior perimeter of the building that would impact the aesthetics and the facade of the building. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us even get worked up over our downspouts sometimes. So, you know, when you start looking at some of the units that only have street-facing facades where you could put like bathroom exhaust, you know, where are you going to start putting those exhaust vents, things like that, and you know, mail slots, nice clean exteriors start getting peppered quite a lot with all sorts of different elements coming out. So I think that's where we're making sure that there's, you know, that combustion exhaust coming out, you know, and all sorts of PVC, et cetera, on what would be a street-facing facade.
So I could see a scenario where maybe without having to come back here, the elevations and plans could be amended to dash in reserved locations for intake and exhaust louvers for mechanical ventilation and toilet room exhausts. And, you know, you could even dash in on the floor plan where a potential accessible toilet would go without, because you have spaces above the doors next to the garage doors where you could potentially put a unit above that door. Correct. And you could probably be pretty clever in a small louver on the exterior wall for a toilet room exhaust, just so we know that those things are feasible.
Yeah, obviously be happy to do that and provide you with drawings that demonstrate that.
Okay, Christian, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was curious about the brick wall that runs along the lower unit alleyway there. It looks like it partially supports the balconies for those upper units, but only extends for the back half of that. And you showed a detail for planting with vines, but first structurally, if you could explain a little bit about the extent of that, and is it a load-bearing aspect of those balconies on the upper part there? And then talk about that, and then I have further questions about your plans for what you have planted in there.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. So that south wall, which in the drawing that you're seeing here in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a note that says outline of existing CMU wall, clean, primed, and painted. That is the existing wall of the building. So what we're trying to do, the existing building is non-conforming relative to zoning. That wall in particular is right on the property line or darn close, 2 inches, within 2 inches. That said, we're trying not to demolish this whole building. We're trying to be really as cognizant of that level of intervention as we can. So keeping that and having it, yes, be a support, a structural support for those balconies is exactly what we're trying to accomplish. So that existing CMU wall may need some level of reinforcement, but right now it's a bearing wall as it is for the existing building. And we're going to take all of its current capacity in that way, utilize it, and then reinforce it as we need to, because we're going to, we'll lighten the dead load on it, but we're putting some additional forces on it that it might not be taking currently, but we are pretty darn sure we can reuse it.
All right, in the second part, you indicated that you looked like you had, some, planters on the top. There we go.
Yeah, Kevin, back up to
there,
A 2.3. There you go.
So your plan, and I don't have the plans in front of me, but you indicated quite a few of those planters along there. They looked like they were spaced fairly evenly, but obviously they wouldn't be on the top of the wall that was supporting the balconies. I thought I counted on your plant list, 21 of these. And I'm just curious on the, practical means of, I'm assuming your assumption is you want to cover that wall with some greenery. Your choice is a pretty tough ivy there, Virginia creeper. It's super aggressive. As tough as it is, trying to keep any plant in a small container alive through the winter is tough. That plant in the ground is certainly hardy here, and then it fully exposed to the elements container setting, a container like that can freeze solid in one cold night in the fall, and that usually just rips apart the roots of any plant that's within them. Also, that's a very aggressive plant. 21 of them along that stretch. Yikes. More, I think almost more realistically, what would work with what you're going for is, having those, they want to grow up and out, not dangle down. I've known people that have tried to plant those on top of retaining walls, and they don't they don't always cooperate. They want to grow up, not down. You might be, if you're going to do that, it might be better off carving out, planting pockets along the sidewalk down below and letting them climb up. And you certainly wouldn't need 21 of them. Probably 5 of them would give you the desired effect. I'm not sure your landscape architects have fully thought out that aspect of it. I'll leave it at that, but I just want to weigh in. I don't want to keep beating a dead horse about the parking here, but I'm very familiar with this neighborhood. I lived on just around the block on East Mifflin for 10 years, and I still frequent businesses in this area. And there's so much about this project that I love, and in a different setting, or if, down to the left of this layout, that little parking lot of the car rental place was somehow part of this, I'd be banging the drum for this. But I can't get past the fact that we have 8 residences and 8 businesses in here with no parking. And I very much admire your aspirational view of getting to a place where there's room for buildings and businesses that don't need cars. I just don't think that's realistic. And I think a building with 8 residences and 8 businesses are going to bring vehicles along with it. And you're just saying that they're going to park on North View and East Washington and East Mifflin, and those spaces are just not always there. And I see that getting worse before it gets better for a lot of different reasons. But that's just a really hard thing to get by. Which is a shame, because there's really a lot to love about this project. that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I think we had an informational and then an application and then a initial approval. So we did give it initial approval. And it would be, I would be interested to see how we could justify on going back on that. I think it was about getting the details right and the wayfinding and the circulation and some clarity on the use, commercial versus residential. So I guess I would ask that either for the commission, either that's been successful or not. But we did grant initial approval on this, which would imply acceptance of the general arrangement of commercial versus residential and the overall mass and aesthetics of the building. Russell.
I'd like to make a motion. I move for final approval. Given the applicant returns back to staff with drawings indicating future louver openings necessary for typical commercial occupancy, as well as restroom venting locations, future restroom venting locations. And in addition to that, a notion of how postal mail will be delivered to the site and centralized. I agreed with Lois's point about slots may not work for all of the 16 units. So some information there to clarify that, but otherwise I am moving for final approval.
Okay, thank you. Is that a second, Shane? Okay. All right. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no hands raised. 3, 2, 1. With those conditions, you have final approval. Thank you very much for your patience and your work on this difficult project. Okay, so that is all that we have to do tonight in terms of approving projects. The rest is informational, and that leads us to number 5, 1954 West Washington Avenue.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at my list here, and we have, let's see, 2 speakers from the development team. One speaker from the development team, that's Kevin Burrow, and then also registered to answer questions would be Lori Heineman. And I believe we also have one other registrant from the public, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. I will pull up the plans in just a moment.
All right, good evening. This is Kevin Burrow with Canopy Bruce Architects. Thank you very much for your time this evening. What we have before you is an informational presentation for the next phase of development at the Avenue property, which is owned by Madison Development Corp. As you can see on your screen here, it's the area outlined in red, and the specific site is highlighted in yellow. So this would be the northern corner, northeast corner of the property, where there's currently an existing surface parking lot and a 2-story office building. If we can go to the next slide. This will show you the context here with regards to the property again, and you can see the yellow highlighted areas, specifically the site. The office building that's been on this property for a number of years was just originally a temporary office building, which has well outlived its lifespan, and the current occupants, Options Community Living, will be moving out in September, and the building does need to be removed and tore down as it's well past its useful lifetime. So there's just the context pictures here showing the area of the site that we're working on. Go to the next slide. As many of you may recall, we just recently completed construction on the Grass Camp building, which is located on the opposite corner of the site along East Washington Avenue. This is a 4-story housing building with commercial office space in front for Madison Development Corp. And this was quite successful in its design and execution with regards to how it fits into the context of the site in the character and style of the original Avenue building, which was originally a University Hospital. If you go to the next slide. So here's the overall site plan. Again, the proposed building is shown in blue in the upper corner of the property. This will be a 2 to 3 story apartment building with 24 apartment units. And the main access to this building for the underground parking will be directly across from where 2nd Street ties into Mifflin Street from the north. And then the area further to the west is still the area earmarked for Grass Camp Park, which will be coming in the future as fundraising efforts have been concluded. So the new Grass Camp building is shown in front in the foreground in the brown color. Next slide, please. The overall layout of the building, this is strictly housing, so it's 3 stories of apartments with underground parking. We are able to achieve a 1-to-1 parking ratio with 24 parking stalls underneath. Then it's a mixture of studios, 1s and 2-bedroom apartments on each of the upper floors. Next slide. The building does step back then on the 3rd floor, as you can see in the upper portion of the screen, where those residents would have larger outdoor patios. But the main intent here is so that it has the character and appearance of a 2-story building directly along the sidewalk, and then transitions into a 3-story building behind. Next slide. The elevation views are shown here. The design of this is very much in context to the recently completed the Grass Camp building, and then also, again, as it ties into the original buildings on the property. We can jump to the rendering so you can clearly see how this shapes out, but you can see the step backs there. So 3-dimensional perspective view here shows the new building in the foreground, again, transitioning from 2 to 3 stories. Then you can see the Grass Camp building in the back, and then the Grass Camp Park shown off to the right-hand side there. So it does fit in well on this site. We have set the building back 13 feet off of the sidewalk along Mifflin Street and actually 18 feet off the sidewalk along 2nd Street to provide as much green space as possible. Next slide. So these are various perspective views. This is a view looking at the intersection of 2nd and Mifflin Street, looking back up to the building. And you can see the height transition pretty clearly here. And each of these first 4 units will have direct entry to them, to their front porches. Next slide. There's a more front-on view. You can see all of the unit entries, and then there's a stair exit shown on the right-hand side where those 2 people are coming out. Next slide. Another view, again, looking at the building. You can see the access to the underground parking here shown going down. Next slide. There's another view. Again, here's where you can help to see the height transition of the building steps back and the idea of creating these 2-story townhome feel buildings or elements along the sidewalk on Mifflin Street. Next slide. This perspective view is on the back side of the building as it faces towards the other buildings on the property. We just wanted to highlight the fact that its design, style, and character and materials are all consistent on all sides of the building. Then there is a stair exit shown in the middle of the screen here as well, wherever a residents could have access to the building. And the sidewalks throughout the property interconnect all buildings. Next slide. Here's a close-up view then as if you were walking down the sidewalk on Mifflin Street, where the 3rd story completely disappears from your view and sight lines, as you can see here. Next slide. And this is our final slide here, the perspective view looking back towards the property. So you can see Grass Camp Park in the foreground and then the new 24 units in the background there looking down Mifflin Street. So with that, I can open it up for any comments or questions.
All right, thank you. I believe that is all the registrants wishing to speak. My question is, maybe I have a lot of cobwebs upstairs, but I thought when the grass camp building came through that there was some amount of master planning and you had anticipated a building very much like this 4 or 5 years ago. Is that right, Kevin? Do you remember? Kevin Burrow?
Yes, we had looked at some various options in the past with regards to master planning. When the grass camp building was reviewed and approved about 3 years ago, now is when we started that process, the zoning code was different such that we were maxing out the density with the new 44 units in the grass camp building. So this site was no longer going to be an option for us. But in the very recent rewrite of the zoning code, with the city encouraging additional density in certain districts, it has opened up the opportunity that we can add additional housing here. And given the fact that the office building needs to come down, we're trying to make the best use of the space by providing additional workforce housing on this property.
Okay, and those of us who weren't on the commission, I know that KBA presented a number of different orientations and site locations for an additional building like this, and the commission can rest assured we examined those very closely, and I believe the one we favored was very similar, more of a townhouse look.
Yes,
if I recall, like what you're presenting.
Yes, that was exactly the case. We had settled on a row of townhouses in that small corner of the site.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
Are there any questions or comments to the applicant tonight? He's looking, it's an informational, so I'm sure he'd like some good feedback for when the official application comes through. Russell, and then Tom.
Kevin, nice presentation. I think it's a very nice looking project. I was not part of the original, and I'm not familiar with the first couple buildings that you designed there. Is there any attempt or maybe possibility to integrate the parking of the various buildings that are part of this master plan? We see the drive going down to the underground parking, but is that connected in any way to the parking of the other buildings?
No, it is not. And unfortunately, there's a bit of topography on the site such that Mifflin Street is lower than the elevation of the property along East Washington Avenue. So the surface parking lot along East Washington Avenue is pretty well isolated, and the connections would have to be via the streets. Because we have the access to the new grass camp building in between there, so we cannot interconnect the two.
Thank you. I think part of the reason I'm asking is we did get a public comment note in about density of the area and concerns there. And so I'm just trying to think ahead about solutions to maybe move the traffic off of Mifflin if somehow trying to really get the most efficiency of parking as we can of the various buildings that are kind of all have a relationship here. So
Sure.
I guess I'd appreciate any other thoughts you have around that, but that's what came to mind.
Right. I just would like to highlight one fact that the commercial office building that's sitting there now really does have a much higher traffic demand with all the employees that work out of that building and come and go for their daily routines, such that by providing housing here at this corner, we were really going to be reducing the amount of traffic coming and going, because residents would typically just leave in the morning, come back at night. There would not be all day long trips coming in and out of this building.
Thank you for that. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, and then Lois.
Yeah, thank you, Cliff. I just wanted to say to Kevin and to the Madison Development Corporation, I appreciate the continuity of the design vocabulary, the fact that you've developed this into a really coherent campus building off of the original UW Hospital building. Grass Camp building clearly built on that, and this does too. And I like the fact that this has a real campus presence. So I think in terms of achieving kind of a design objective of a campus continuity, this does a real nice job.
Thank you very much.
Lois?
And I'm going to second what Tom just said, with the exception of I was hoping that there was a little bit more scale, slight shift of scale on the Mifflin facing building. It has a large punched opening, large wide stairways going up and overhangs. I'm wondering if there's a way to give it a little bit more of a scale for facing Mifflin than what it has now, because it is just very similar. And I appreciate the simplicity. I really like the materials. It just seems like the scale is just a little bit kind of commercial for facing Mifflin for housing. And I'm not quite sure what to put my finger on it. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts to opportunities for that.
We could take a closer look at that. I appreciate your comment, and that's a very valid point. We are trying to stay within the vernacular of the new Grass Camp building, which played off of the UW Hospital building. But we could look at reducing the scale slightly on some of these elements to have it be more in context with the single family nature of the rest of the street, just maybe possibly reducing the size of the windows slightly, or looking at the detailing a little bit differently to try and bring down the overall scale and feel of this.
Right. And even the style of the handrails, that's very commercial, the painted steel, I'm not sure what material, but maybe even just the design of it. It could still be steel, obviously, but something that would bring the context down to a little bit more of a residential feel.
Yeah, those little balcony overhangs with the tension rods might be supported with some columns or something like that would be more in keeping of a front porch. Little things like that could probably go a long way.
Certainly. I appreciate the comments.
Okay, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. To build on what you and Lois just said, because Kevin, some of your projects blend together, and my memory is fading me. But I believe we had similar comments on this specifically. There was a lot of thought that went into the site design, the park. I remember going through this, and I think one of the comments we went back and forth on it was similar to this, where we talked about gable roof versus flat roof and trying to give that softer residential feel to this north side facing property. And I think some of those suggestions that were just put there too, of not making any radical changes, but I think there's small, soft changes that you could do. Again, just to bring that same comment. I'm just beating a dead horse at this point, but I like everything it is. It's just trying to make that nod on this north side to be more residential, as the other said. Thank you overall, as Tom said, to a great site design and kind of capping off this campus and this development. It's very, very nice.
Great. Thank you very much, Craig.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the commission? This is informational, and we've given some pretty good input. Jessica.
Yeah, I don't know if this is in our purview, but I'm curious about the driveway to the parking being directly across from the three-way intersection of 2nd Street and Mifflin. And that would go to traffic engineering, I'm sure. But have you gotten any feedback on that already, Kevin?
Yeah, actually, we have discussed this with Sean Malloy, and he appreciates the driveway location such that now we could do a stop sign at the intersection of 2nd Street heading southbound, if you will, towards Mifflin, and a stop sign on our driveway to have it be more of a controlled intersection than what it currently is.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and none of the neighbors have that driveway right in front of their house too. So it's a good logical location. Okay, any other questions or comments before we let Kevin enjoy the rest of his evening? Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. We'll be seeing you soon.
Yes, thank you very much for your feedback.
You bet. And now we're at number 6, 555 West Mifflin Street.
Thank you, Chair. We have got one member of the development team wishing to speak, and that's Jeremy Sinkar, excuse me. And we have one other speaker wishing to speak in support and 2 other speakers from the public available to answer questions. Just wanted to double check with Julie to make sure that if there were any updates from that on this item or perhaps on the last one.
No updates. You got it right.
Okay, great. I will pull up the plans in just a moment.
This is the illustrious Rastafarian church head shop place that was in the news a couple of years ago.
Yes, it would be.
House of Rastafari. There it is.
There it is. Correct.
I'm not a member. I'm not in the clergy or anything like that.
Good evening. I'm Jeremy Sinkar with Pedestrian Design Architects. Here, obviously, today to present our proposed new building project here at this location on the corner of West Mifflin and Bedford Street. Our building proposed project is a 3.5-story, 6-unit apartment building within this location. As you can see, as I just said, it's kind of on the corner of this, which kind of makes it an interesting location. This property has been used for some time as many different commercial uses, such as originally an office/warehouse, at one point a laundromat, and most recently a church. Next slide. Here are some of the elevations of what this existing building is. Obviously, it's at the end of the street, heavily residential street with a 1-story commercial building. Kind of the big things that I want to point out on this slide is the proximity or setbacks of the building are currently at 0 on all 3 of the sides. The back side actually has a small driveway. No current green space on the property. The owners, Bali and Gershon, who are familiar with this property, were first looking as an idea of maybe taking over this property for an expansion of their veterinary business, where they have a couple locations in Wisconsin. When that didn't seem to quite work as an option, they contacted us about the potential of using this property to provide a residential building to provide the neighbors with some more options for renters in the area. Next slide. So to show some context of what is there, in 2 of the slides, you can actually see our red building in the distance. Directly behind would be the picture to the right, which is a residential building, residential house. To the left of it, which is the bottom left, is again some more residential with its lovely multiple balconies. And then across the street is the top left photo. Next. So we have, obviously, we're adjacent directly to residential, but we are also across from the LARC, newer development across the street. And down the street on Bedford, we do have I can't remember the name of the building, but the old brick building. And so, a real challenge for us with this concept was being on the edge of both, trying to tie in with the 2 and allow us to fit within the context of both. Next slide. So here is the existing site and the location as I kind of described. The existing building just butts up directly against the sidewalk of this property. One of the challenges, or the main challenges that we faced while trying to develop something residential here that was more than a single unit, or more than 2, even 3, was the size of the site. being only 66 feet deep by 33 and change wide. It only gives us a property that is approximately 2,200 square feet. And so it created a challenge. Next slide. So from our early discussions with the city zoning department, we came up with a building footprint to maximize lot coverage that met the zoning ordinances for setbacks, size, scale, while also providing the type of units that the owner was looking at doing. As you can see in this diagram, which we'll come back to later as well, we have a 5-foot setback at the front property line and just under a 5 along the side. Bedford Street, really the dimension, if you can see it on your drawing, is a 15-foot setback for a recently adopted ordinance of 15 feet from the edge of curb to the building to provide landscaping trees within the terrace area. Next slide. And so, as I said earlier, our building is really constructed of a 3.5-story building with a brand new basement below. This is just a quick blow up of the basement area, which really is used for mechanicals for our sprinkler system, as well as storage for the potential storage for the tenants, for their bikes, for other items, and then just general building storage. Next. On the first floor, we consist of our two main types of the units that we have, which is the efficiency in the front and the single bedroom in the back. As you can see, again, as I kind of mentioned, the real struggle with this whole property is providing enough space for all the components that are in there. By allowing us to stay under a 4-story building, we were allowed not to have the requirement of an elevator. By keeping it smaller in scale, we were also allowed to only have one main exit because the building will be sprinkled. So really the amount of public space within the building is kept to a real minimum. And by doing that, one of the ways to do that is to create that first front entry area up to the top left as the main entrance for the entire building, which allows for mail deliveries as well as access to the first 2 units on the first floor. One of those units being a fully ADA unit, the back unit, and then also providing stair access to the upper floors. Next. Second floor mimics what's going on below, with balconies in the front that is actually recessed into the facade as it's kind of the space of the entrance below. And then in the back, rear facing, we do have a balcony attached to the exterior of the building. Next. On the third floor, we're able to kind of mimic some of the same concepts, but we were also able to add an additional stair up within each unit to provide on the back unit, actually a second bedroom space, and on the front unit to actually have a bedroom space up on the loft space and have a large open area below for the kitchen and dining room space. Next. Real quickly, here's that loft plan that we just kind of mentioned, so you can see both of those. They open up quite nicely to the front, allowing a view down to below and allowing a more sense of grandeur in this small space. Next. For the exterior of our building, if we kind of reflect back on some of the elements that are in the neighborhood, we try to have to tie in both the commercial and the residential at this main corner. So on the first floor, we kind of stuck with a traditional material of a brick. Also good for maintaining any kind of beating up or conditioning that it does occur when you have people walking somewhat close to your property. Again, on the left, we have that main front entrance with the first floor unit also having a secondary patio area off the front. And then on this left elevation, you'll also see for the second and third floor, those recessed balcony areas. So as I was kind of talking about the materials a little bit, we do have fiber cement board, which is shown as the kind of tannish gray panel. And then the blue panels are actually metal panels. And then we had kind of some of the context we're taking from the adjacent buildings of having some windows that are stacked vertically, as well as kind of an element on the corner to kind of bring emphasis to that corner of the building. Next. And then again, here's that side elevation. Our first floor does sit back a little bit from the upper floor, so there is a slight overhang. as well as the blue corner element that has the window does pop out from the rest. The one thing I want to point out on this is you see a lot of venting that was shown. In our early discussions with the contractor, Bachman, we were looking at having more units that were located within each of the units for HVAC. However, based on the space that we have in the basement and annex space, we're going to be able to remove those elements and actually have typical units within the basement and annex. So the real reason we're here today is, we've had this meeting or we've had this discussion with both the neighborhood. From their original meeting with them, they had very positive feedback on our proposed building. It's the kind of building that they are kind of looking for. It's contextually appropriate in size. It's not oversized. It's not undersized. It provides a little bit more opportunity for renters and different types of layouts. And in general, just kind of like the general approach of it. What we ran into after we got through the first phase of talking with the zoning was when we got some comments back from the city regarding what's called the Mifflin plan, which is a fairly new addition to the code. Wasn't brought up to our attention early on, but as we've kind of dove into it, one of the main comments that is dictating how we can move forward with this project is in regards to the setbacks. If we go back to slide number 6, please, which is the new site plan. Thank you. As you can see on there, we have roughly 1,500 square feet of usable space within our proposed building. And again, that those setbacks on the front and the side do meet the current ordinances. However, in the Mifflin plan, it has recommendations to increase those setbacks. On the main street of West Mifflin, it takes it from a 5-foot back to 15 feet. And on the Bedford side, it's asking for 10 feet, not from the street edge, but actually from the property line. In our particular case, in our small property of 2,200 square feet, that's a reduction of 36% of the overall usable space of the property, taking us down from roughly 1,500 square feet down to 950. And in terms of our project, that would be something that just would hamper us to the fact that we would not be able to provide the units necessary to build this building and maintain the value that's there. And I think in general, just based on that, the requirements for this particular lot, it would be hard for anybody in the future to potentially do something on here. So I'm looking for some comments and thoughts on if we can move forward, as those are recommendations, as my understanding is of the Mifflin code, and that would help us, continue forward and address the couple other small issues that are out there as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, there's also Tim Camps registered in support, wishing to speak. Is that correct, Tim? Or has Jeremy given us all the information in his 3 minutes?
I believe Tim Camps was registered to speak. Is he still with us?
He is not with us, no.
Okay. Before we open it up to the commission, Kevin, would you mind expounding a little bit on the staff report with regard to the setbacks, balconies, et cetera?
Sure. And I think Jeremy did a pretty good job of kind of summarizing the issue. I think the key issue regarding setbacks is, I guess there's a few different layers here. I think first I want to point out the site is zoned UMX, urban mixed use. And from a front yard standpoint, that district has a maximum setback of 10 feet. So essentially, for the front yard, go from 0 to 10 feet would be allowed by zoning. I don't believe there's a side yard setback requirement. As I understand the proposal right now, there is no change of zoning proposed. This is a use that's otherwise permitted in the zoning district. The Urban Design Commission does review the project because you are actually going to be an approving body if this is formally submitted. But I did want to note that maximum setback is 10 feet. The Mifflin plan had a recommended, again, and that's the advisory plan, but did recommend a deeper setback along Mifflin Street of 15 feet. and then a setback along Bedford of 10 feet. There was considerable discussion when that plan was going through about what those setbacks would be. And I think that's noted in the staff report. So I wanted to just kind of highlight that issue among the other ones that are in the staff report. So I definitely encourage any feedback on the points that I raised. But I think the setback one was probably the most technically complex. And if there's questions, commission members, I'm certainly happy to expound on that if necessary. So just please let me know.
So it looks like the site plan as we're seeing it today would be in compliance.
It would, yes. This would comply with the zoning regulations. It would be inconsistent with the subsequent plan recommendations for the area. Just as one other quick point, and I think we've discussed this at other points, but largely speaking, this is an area that's recommended as a future urban design district, and so different setbacks could be incorporated as part of a design district. But at this point, that district has not been created. So we have the zoning regulations and then the plan recommendations today.
Okay. Are there any comments with regard to the design overall? This is informational, so I think they'd appreciate us giving them our feedback. Okay, Russell.
There we go. Thank you for the presentation, Jeremy. I was excited by the Mifflandia plan, and I remember some presentations about that. So I will want to dust that off a little bit and be a little more sensitive to what maybe the intent of those setbacks were. But I guess my reaction to this is that it seems like pretty good use of that corner. There's not a lot of opportunity there, and you're doing a nice job of using it. And the scale seems to be the scale to the pedestrians on the street seems to be comparable to the building catty corner across the intersection there. So I guess that's my reaction about the setback. But and in terms of the building design, I'll be curious to hear what others have to say. But I would like to understand maybe just right off the bat, or there's what appear to be shutters. To me, on the elevation, they look like wood shutters, like you see in a residential property. Maybe the next elevation has. Jeremy, could you there? And there was no pointer to them, kind of giving me what to call these things. Could you just tell me maybe the intent of those elements there?
In our original design, we were really, because of the size, really focusing in on how we're going to provide AC and or HVAC units for these apartments. And so those were actually bending, and we made them linear. They wouldn't necessarily all be functional. So they're vertical venting elements that are allowed for the HVAC unit to be directly behind that and draw and release air from that. However, we haven't been able to update this plan, but like I mentioned, we were able to talk with the contractors a little bit and came up with a new design concept that would actually allow us to put those HVAC units above and below in the basement in the attic space, thus removing anything that looks like a shutter from the facade.
Okay, and Jeremy, I did hear you say that kind of toward the interview presentation. Just so you know, your audio is a little weak. So I did hear you saying something to that tune, but I didn't quite catch it. So anyway, okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. Thanks. I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps you're in the future you'll be able to look into getting a different microphone. It's very, very tinny.
Okay, thank you.
Lois.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a couple questions about, well, first, the windows seem to be kind of disjointed. I'm seeing a transom, I'm seeing some, that corner unit's very commercial looking, and then the punched windows. I'm wondering if there's also an opportunity to increase the size of the windows, based on where they're located, it seems like you have an opportunity to add a little bit more natural light into some of these units. In particular, above on the rear elevation, I'm not quite sure, there's a big blank spot above the balcony, the second floor balcony. And when I go to the plan, I'm not sure what's happening at that loft. I think is it the left side is the back of the building?
That is correct.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure what that empty space above the stairwell is, and then how, why we don't have windows going to the bedroom from the front there. I mean, it's the blank wall, right?
Which can you describe a little bit better?
So you have so the balcony, the second floor balcony at the rear elevation.
Yes. So the intent actually, it's interesting. That was a comment by the neighborhood association. They wanted us to add a window. I'm surprised I didn't have it on there. So we did actually add a window above, more of a window that ties into the long rectangular that you do see on the front elevation next to it of the upper transom windows. The idea with that, we would have some transom windows that tie into the head height of the window to the east or right of that in the blue section. So yes, that dead space has been addressed by providing more windows to allow more light into that folded area of the second floor, technically third floor living room.
It is the same go for the Mifflin side where we, I know you have a balcony there, but above that even.
So above that side, so those are two balconies above the doorway on the left. There is no usable space above there. That is actually attic space. That's why there's no window.
Okay.
But maybe an architectural element could be used, or creating a higher emphasis with the colors and materials to draw some difference to that area. To do
okay. And I just there seems to be like, I'm seeing like some horizontals, the front entrance has that very strong horizontal pattern door, and then the punched openings that are more vertical, and then the kind of commercial corner. It seems kind of disjointed, and I feel like there should be a little bit more consistency with the proportions and styles of the penetrations in the building.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is a very small building and a little restraint on the variety and proportion of windows. And I question whether a building of this scale really is a good candidate for spandrel glass too.
Right.
Okay, let's see. Is that all, Lois, or are there any other questions?
That was all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, then we'll go to Craig and followed by Russell.
Thanks, Cliff. Similar comments to follow up, Lois and you, Cliff. Some of adding, symmetry lines, and if you're going to do elements that are different, making sure you have some restraint. So if you go to the Mifflin elevation we're looking at right now, when you go up that stair, I understand there's a recess for the patio, but understanding if it really warrants having even a different material setback, or if I think it's Smart Side, should just go along the backside too. Also with the color difference, if that's west facing, realize that's also going to increase the heat gain there in an area that when you're sitting might also be hot too. So unless you're trying to draw attention to a patio that might have furniture and other things out there, it might actually go to disappear more, and then draw a highlight to the spandrel glass if that's your design element. Like draw attention to that, but don't draw less attention to it by making other elements that distract from that. So I think between the Mifflin and then if you go to the Bedford elevation, we talked a little bit about this as well too. If you're getting rid of those shutter elements, but then also that transition between the darker green and the spandrel glass back to the Smart Side. if you're also going to have a vertical element, and if it's so, maybe tying it together or dyeing it off so the base can be one single element all the way across as well too. Unless it's going to be an element going straight all the way through, some of those lines should either, I think they should just go away, especially on the base. Other than that, I think what you're doing here as far as space setbacks, I think you did a very good job utilizing the space. I think overall, with just some of those minor tweaks, you have a pretty successful design here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments.
Thanks, Craig. Russell?
Thank you, Cliff. I guess preparing you for the next round here, I can't read some of the call outs on the plans. That would be great to be able to read the text. But I think you've got some calling out some cement siding, and I'm kind of curious. There's a rib metal panel. I'm sorry, Kevin, if you can go to the one before this, one up. On the right-hand drawing, is the design intent to have the same thickness? What's the relationship between the metal panel thickness, vertical thickness, and the cement siding? Or do you want those to align or not align? Is there a relationship you want to achieve there? Just
correct. Yeah, that's a good question. The concept behind it is that the fiber cement siding has the residential tie-in or context to the adjoining properties and things like that. The metal kind of is a tie-in to what's commercial there, but at the same time, we didn't want the scale of a large formatted panel, just due to the overall size. So they are similar in size. I believe the fiber cement is shown at 6, whereas the metal siding is actually an 8-inch. It's a different type of profile. Sometimes you have like a rib metal panel. This is actually a flush 8-inch with a 1-inch setback reveal, and then it kind of staggers in such manner. So it has a more contemporary commercial feel to it, but trying to scale it down to a more residential type size.
Okay, and maybe instead of asking, I should just been more open with my reaction to this. I mean, I think you really want some clear intention there. I think if those distances are quite different, and I don't know, that it just could look very misaligned. I think it's a pretty important facade there. And so I don't think I'm necessarily advocating for them to be the exact same, though, necessarily. I think if there was a rhythm between the two, perhaps that was intentional, that could be successful. And then the other question I was going to ask is, were you thinking storefront on the corner glass, or a curtain wall, or a storefront system?
Yeah, correct. All of our windows, we were leaning towards that as our approach with that. And the reason behind the kind of large glass / spandrel glass corner is our original concept was that it was like a beacon to the neighborhood. With being the main living room spaces, they would be lit up more often, and therefore there would be a glow coming from that corner of the property, thus kind of grabbing attention to the overall edge of the corner of that.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure the neighborhood wants that, but I guess I would tend to kind of agree with some other comments about it doesn't feel quite like maybe the residential function that you have going on in there, maybe, and I wonder if a continuation of some punched opening windows would be a little more simple on a small building. So yeah.
Agreed. After hearing the comment, I think thinking about it a little bit more, I do see that might be a better option for this.
Yeah. And last but not least, just I guess a little more clarity on colors, maybe that you're thinking, and maybe if it's not known and you want to make certain gestures or something like that. But I just was curious about the spandrel glass, that if that truly was good. You're going for truly different color there. So anyway, I mean, on the next round here, maybe just kind of helping us understand that. I know it sounds like the spandrel glass may not stick around, but anyway.
Yeah, if it does, I will clarify that. The intent was that it was supposed to not have a bright color change or anything like that. So we'll clarify that with our next round.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree, Russell, about the beacon. Having seen some student apartment buildings in Madison with large floor-to-ceiling living room glass on corners, they are not always the most evolved and at the mature stage in their lives in terms of interior decor. And so looking into pyramids and huge posters of various social activities might not be what you're after. You know, at night, it may be more inwardly focused than a beacon shining triumphantly toward the exterior. One comment before I turn it over to Craig and Jessica is, with all the money we'll save you with spandrel glass, I'd ask you to please consider using modular brick instead of utility brick at the first floor. It's a very small amount of brick. It's a low scale area, and you talk about the residential scale. And I think in a very small application like this, you get a lot more cutting and overscale of the brick than you would with a modular brick down there.
Okay, thanks for the suggestion.
Yep. Craig, followed up by Jessica.
Thanks, Cliff. And I think we covered this, but if we didn't specifically, you know, with all the different variety of windows, and I think we've convinced you, the spandrel glass, of just making sure that the glazing is all consistent too. Again, with the corner property, and you're going to see two sides of this, you know, maybe three sides when you kind of come around the corner, if this is the new kind of south entrance to Mifflinlandia, that you get all the different actual glazing to essentially kind of match on these facades. So that's just another reason to try to make it more uniform, all your different openings. Thank you.
Thanks.
Jessica?
Yeah, I just wanted to put a suggestion that how you transition from material to material on a building this small could really make an impact. So I'm particularly looking at like the rear elevation where you go from the cement siding, the cream color to the blue, and what's happening up at the top for the roof trim then. So I just encourage you to investigate that and all the transitions between materials, and also what happens at corners as well.
Okay, thank you.
Russell, am I seeing this right? You want have your hand raised?
I want another one. I want another one. I was inspired with an idea here. Though I really like the loft. I don't think I mentioned that before. That's pretty cool that you guys figured out a way to make that work. So I would just take that a step further and say, yeah, geez, there's lots of hours in the year that a resident could take advantage of that vertical height with natural ventilation. And that certainly has an exterior component and reflection to that. But basically, I would just encourage the design team to find a way to get screened operable fenestration low in the space, and then also screened operable fenestration high in that space, so that you really could encourage air movement on a nice, cool evening. So that transom maybe is a little high, but so anyway, I was inspired with that idea. Something you should consider.
Great suggestion.
Shane.
Just very quickly, and I apologize if I missed this, but I see that open scupper and downspout is noted on the elevation, and if that's truly the case, if the roof water isn't plumbed to the storm sewer, just depicting so we can see how that downspout kind of contributes to the composition of the building. That's all.
The intent is that we at one point did have two downspouts completely where the small dash lines are located near the top. However, after further investigation, we were able to decide that that's actually a relief scupper, and then we will have internal draining of all the roof down to below.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Wait a minute. Jessica, and then I'll think about it.
Sorry, I had one more question. I just wanted to verify on the site plan, you have recycling and refuse in the northeast corner, but is that outside the first floor unit's bedroom window?
It is located near the bedroom. That is correct. We've been kind of struggling with how to best deal with that, but that is something that's on our radar of how we can address that. We did move the windows in general further away from them the best we could. At one point, they were directly, you could see it on the first floor there. It's pushed as far to the south on plan as we could to hope to avoid any of that. It's not ideal for sure, but we haven't quite mastered that location yet.
Yeah, well, in your elevations, it shows just a little bit of landscaping, but in the site plan, it shows that perhaps the landscaping goes past those first floor patio window doors. And I think that would help a lot to keep those a little private. And yeah, that window by the refuse is a tough one.
It is, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Russell, are you trying to do like a Columbo episode here?
I'll be very quick, but the longer we look at the project, the more excited I get about some opportunities. So you always encourage us, Cliff, to share our thoughts now before they come back for the next one. So, okay. You've heard a lot of comments about the elevation, simplifying perhaps, changing some spandrel. Right now, the building on Bedford Street has a wonderful opportunity for a green wall of some sorts. There's not much mass on the other side of Bedford. You've got a nice southern exposure there. I know there's lots of people that like green in their life. And, I just asked the project to consider whether some kind of a green wall, living wall, be a potential for this project. Thank you.
Love it. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, any other raising of the hands? Any other comments or questions? Okay, I don't see anybody going twice. All right, thank you very much for this presentation, and we look forward to seeing you back here on a future meeting for 555 West Mifflin. That moves us into business by members. Particularly number 7. As you recall, last meeting we had an informal discussion about virtual versus in-person meetings based on a memo that came from Heather Stouter's office and informing us that I can't remember, end of August or sometime in September, we're going to continue the way we have been going, and that the default is to stay with a virtual meeting. However, we as a body, if we voted on it, could request to meet in person. So there were some people who were on the fence, and there were some people who really thought it would be nice to see the applications and the applicants face to face, since technology will not allow us to view the presenters. We can only see their name with a little telephone icon next to them. So what I promised to do was give the commission an opportunity to take a vote on whether or not we wanted to request that permission to meet in person. And having the opportunity to have thought about it for the last 2 weeks, I hope you've given it some thought. And like anything else we do around here, there would have to be a motion, a second of the motion, some discussion on the motion, and then finally a vote. And I believe we would need to have a majority of the quorum vote in favor of going personal for us to advance that request to the council or the executive committee or whoever it is in the mayor's office, maybe that makes that decision. Kevin, I don't remember exactly who we appeal to, but it's a higher authority.
Yes, I believe once the commission, if the commission were to take a vote, then it would go on to the mayor, and from Heather's correspondence, mayor and common council leadership would have to approve the move.
Okay, there you go. And before we make a motion, feel free to have discussion beforehand as well, Lois.
Yeah, I had a question. So what is the timing of this? You said it would be August, October, I think it was. Is that right? October?
Yeah, I don't have the memo in front of me, but I know at minimum we've got into September before we can make any changes.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I ask is it just feels that things are unsure with, kind of making this, it's not just for us, it's about all of the participants of the meeting as well. It won't be a hybrid where the public can make comments via telephone. It's going to have to be all or nothing. And so my only hesitation to say we should meet in person is not knowing where, the Delta variant is going, and that we are committing the public at large, as well as, our whole committee to meeting in person without having a kind of a clear cut what's happening with pandemic.
Right. And I think any lockdown measures that cannot be foreseen now, or even when the memo was written, would supersede that. But I think that the thought is that going forward, this is going to be the default for the foreseeable future. So if we can be optimistic and say, even within 3 months, the pandemic will again be under control, this will still be our default method of meeting for the foreseeable future. And so I think we've got to look at it in that context. Kevin? But
we could still decide next, if we can't make a decision, right, we could always change it to in person.
We can make, as far as what I understand, is we can make that request between now and any future meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Just to add, in Heather's memo, essentially the date is 1 month before you would, in this case, change to an in-person meeting. So that would be the timeline. So if there was a decision tonight, that would potentially open up a possibility, for September. And if it was later, it would just move that back a month.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. So we have 3 hands raised: Shane, Russell, and then Craig.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. I agree with Lois's comments. I've been very much on the fence on this topic, which is why at our last meeting, I really didn't comment much. But over the last couple of weeks, I think just observing what's been happening and the slight kind of upswing in the charts with the Delta variant, I think it would be prudent to maybe establish a future date for reevaluating or voting again. But I think at this time, staying virtual would be my preference. And I think it comes with a lot of the benefits that others commented on. Like, I'm thinking some of the things Tom mentioned last time as well. So just wanted to throw that out there. So kind of get my opinion out on the floor before we take a vote.
Great. And like I said, I mean, we're not necessarily going to take a vote unless there's a motion. Let's see, I said Russell and then Craig, right? Yep.
I'm curious whether a UDC meeting has occurred in the public wearing masks, and how successful that may or may not be, because as of today, I had my first meetings indoors with masks on again, and based on the county's recommendations. And so anyway, that's not an experience I have to know what a public, UDC meeting would be like with masks on and whether we've done that. So that might be just one question that if anyone had insight to share on that, that might help me.
No insight. Craig.
Thanks, Cliff. First of all, I got to ask: is there a hand count, raise hand count function we can add on Zoom meetings just to get a count on Russell of how many times? All right, I'm done. It's anyways. I think regardless of the pandemic, I actually think of like the pros and cons as we kind of learn new ways to work. Obviously, when we do the virtual like materials and looking at them and getting photos, boy, it's been a little bit hard of just going through that transition of actually not seeing it. But then again, when we see presentations, every monitor is a little bit different. So we're even looking at them through the city's monitor, and every computer screen is a little bit different how you see materials. I do enjoy the fact that, I'm going back to work, so I'm getting my social interactions there. But I do like the flexibility of, if I'm running late at work, I can just log on through this meeting. Or today I came home because I had to let the dog out. And honestly, it's just easier not going downtown. Now, Lois works across the street from where the UDC is, so maybe she thinks differently. But to me, with the pros and cons, regardless of pandemic, I actually find it more convenient to do it this way. My wife sneaks me snacks during the meeting, which you guys may or may not see. To me, it's just easier. So that's my thoughts.
I saw Shane eating some cookies or something. Tom.
Yeah. I did chime in last time, so you kind of know where I'm coming from, but I had a couple comments. One is, as a member of the UDC, I sit on the UW Design Review Board because nobody else wanted to do it. So I've been doing that. We've had a couple architects present materials in a way that I found was very effective over Zoom. And that was they would create a palette of putting all the materials together, which many of them do, but they would photograph it outside, both in sunlight and in shade. And where it was an addition to or a project next to an existing university building, they would put it there next to the existing materials. I was thinking like tonight, West High and East High. What's the brick really going to look like? So we could, if we were to choose to stay with Zoom, there are ways to enhance the material presentation that I found very effective, particularly the sunlight issue. Because I agree with Craig, we don't see the materials right, and often when the damn building gets built, we go, what? And that's what we approved? I don't remember that. So that just ways to, if we continue, ways to enhance the presentation, particularly on the materials issue. I think that's all I have.
Okay. Well, like I said, I promised that I would give the opportunity for a motion, but I am not pushing that. I just want to give the opportunity to those who feel strongly about moving back to an in-person meeting. We don't have to vote to maintain the status quo. Well, you had one more thing, Tom?
I muted myself. Yeah, I actually had a question from maybe either to Kevin or to Alder Aburus. I thought that the council recently requested to do a hybrid model where they would go back and forth. And I'm kind of wondering, is that not, I know the Heather's memo did not offer that option to us, but are any other city committees going to do a hybrid where they can do both in person and the Zoom model? I was confused why one group might be able to do that and we're not being able to do that.
I can go first, Kevin, from my perspective. From Plan Commission, I still get the sense that group is not shifting to in person for now, at least. So I don't think that actually they would have an option. I think that for Plan Commission, we'd be in the same boat as UDC, that we'd have to pick one or the other. That's my understanding for like committees, councils, boards. I've actually haven't had any substantive conversation about council meetings going in person. So there could be a potential looking at hybrid, but I don't, I guess I'd say I know a lot of colleagues who would be against it, personally. And then CDBG, another committee that I serve on too, they're remaining remote, and would be in this, again, the same boat, kind of all in, either in person or virtual. And so we're remaining virtual in that space. But I don't know, Kevin, do you have any more insight on the council part of a hybrid model there? There might be something there.
No, and it's interesting, Tom, because just earlier today, somebody had also asked me a question. I think the question, at least that one was, well, 2 meetings in person, 1 meeting virtual, or, the opposite of that. So it wasn't a hybrid meeting that you could participate both ways. It was kind of a rotating schedule.
Hybrid is misleading, right?
Yeah, but that said, I don't know, and I can check in. I haven't had any direct conversations, so I could certainly check in with Heather and other staff to see if that's something that other commissions are checking. But at this point, I don't know if that's an option that other bodies are considering at this point.
I thought I actually read it in a newspaper article that was, maybe it was the council's decision, but the city hasn't necessarily said they'll implement it yet. I don't know. But yeah, just check and see. I mean, if one body has the option to go back and forth, I would hope that would be extended to bodies like ours. So just if you could research that one, I'd appreciate it.
I'm happy to, and if there's a correspondence or an easy answer, I can send an email out to the commission if there's a quick answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so after all, we are the Urban Design Commission.
Yeah.
Craig.
Thanks, Cliff. And maybe it's a topic for a different day, but I thought what Tom said was actually really good about taking pictures on a sunny day and a cloudy day and putting that in the packet, especially for us reviewing it ahead of time. And then also, which could be a separate topic, is are we ever going back to paper print off? Because I don't mind doing electronic, and let's save a couple trees. To me, now I know Julie likes to do the driving around, and she can't drop off treats that way, or she can't have a beer in the driveway with me. But regardless, I think that would actually be quite helpful, because sitting inside, and I forget what the temperature of the lights are in the city, you don't get it the same, and then it's nighttime, so you're not even getting any fresh light. So I think that would actually be very helpful to have outside pictures in natural light.
Thanks for giving us up, Craig.
Well, paper would have been nice. So Legistar crashed for a while until Stefan fixed it somehow miraculously. But
and one thing I could add, regardless of timing, that's something that when Julie and I have our pre-application meetings, we can just talk about making sure you've got the best representative materials boards and outside photos. Because Tom, I agree that those are pretty successful, or at least more successful than kind of the one shot. So that's an easy ask, and I can start doing that from at pre-application meetings going forward.
That would be good.
Yeah, this looking like it's going to be more of a normal circumstance, a little adjustment on the way materials are presented, I think would be a really good request. Okay, let's see. I don't see any other hands raised. Certainly, if there's not a motion to go in person now, we can revisit this issue. Maybe in the last meeting in September or something, and see where we are. We do have the opportunity to revisit it in the future. We'll probably end up going back in person sometime in January, when we all have to trudge through snowbanks and dig through them to get to the parking meters and stuff like that. Okay. Any other business by members? I think our next meeting is in 2 weeks. Is that correct? Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. Then by unanimous consent at 7:29, we're adjourned. Good night.
Hi, everybody.
Good night.